Welcome to the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny. If this is your first time listening or your 50th time listening, this is what to expect on this episode. We dive into the concepts of developing your leadership toolbox. Why do you need this? You need this in any situation to help manage, lead, and control, and ultimately win. How do you do that? You can't use the same form of leadership in everything you do. So every episode, we dive into my leadership philosophy. We dive into the story and the background of the person we're talking to. And we also dive into some leadership traits I have accrued throughout the years. And then we also follow it up with a book review at the end. So you're getting a wide range of leadership topics and traits that you can add to your kit. So without further ado, let's go into the recap of this episode. And afterwards, if you love it, like it, share it, follow it, give us some feedback because we're only just getting started. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Lampson, and this one, we're just going to have to do it. I can't wait any longer. It's hard to get the time, and I just want people to know, the story, everybody always asks me after some episodes, hey, what's your story? What's your story? I did a quick little intro on my intro episode with my wife. That was more explaining, the podcast a little bit later in my career, but we're going to cover the 3 H's on myself. That's right. Who is Manny? Where did he come from? Why is he doing this? What helped him get here? What better way to do it than at 4 o'clock in the morning before I'm going to the gym, drinking some pre-workout? So we're going to do this. I couldn't wait any longer. All right. The 3 H's. Hometown, heroes, and hardship. Manny, what do you got for us today? All right. Hometown. I grew up in a very small town in Northern California. I was originally born in Germany. My dad was in the military stationed out there. That's where he met my mom. But it was only 2 years, a very short time in my life. It didn't really affect who I was or how I grew up. It's just a fun story to talk about. But then he came back to Northern California where he was born and raised and started working for a tire company. So we lived in small towns throughout Northern California. If you're familiar with that area, it's up by Chico area. We grew up in Gridley and Corning. And that's what made me growing up. And I say this loosely. When I joined the military, I realized I grew up in a bubble. I had this is all before the internet too. So there wasn't a way to really search what was going out there. You didn't really have social media to see everything. So it was just small town living. You hear country songs about it. That's what it's like. We had 2 stoplights in my hometown in Gridley where I grew up. And then my high school was about 130 people in my senior class where you knew everybody. You had your small cliques. You had Friday night football, which was going on. You had sports. Like when they talk about driving trucks into country roads to bonfires, that's what some of the parties were like that I went to and hung out with at my friends. But other than that, it was simple. But it's also a hardship that I had to learn about later on in life. It wasn't anything extravagant growing up in a small town. It made me who I am because I had really, really good relationships with my parents, my brother, my close friends, my coaches. And that's just the way life was up there. And I loved it. I wish my kids have a small town living growing up, which we sort of do in Abilene right now because it helps you grow, helps you test yourself a little bit more and push yourself a little bit further. But that's where I am. That's my hometown right there. Gridley, California. That's what I claim. I say Gridley because that was my high school life. Even though I grew up in Corning area, really elementary up to high school, that was just, very small living there. I can remember my brother and I riding our bikes around to school, but then Gridley is what made me. You'll hear a lot of people call me by one of my nicknames, which is Corning, because when I moved to Gridley my freshman year after the fall sports. So if you're not familiar with high school sports, they sort of break it up into fall, winter, and spring. We had football, then you had basketball and baseball were the primary sports in that order. So after football, my fall year, freshman in high school, I didn't play. Moved to a new town. It was 45 minutes down the road. So you played each other in high school. You knew about those towns. My cousins were very big in the town I grew up in Corning. So I moved to a new town and the name was there, Lampson. So it was funny to talk to my coaches and they're expecting, the Lampson name. And I moved there with a bald head and
super tiny. And oh man, those pictures are hilarious. But anyways, yes, Gridley, California. Growing up playing sports, those primary sports with some other sports in between. I tried tennis, I tried cross country. Let's see, and then I did a little bit of track as well. But sports was life. Sports, church, friends, like that was it. Friday night was sports, followed by watching some film. Saturday on the weekends was followed by going over to the coaches' houses to watch film. Sunday was followed by church and football. And then the rest of the week was just hanging out, living that small town life. So there it is right there. Nothing too crazy about it. It was, it was normal. But that's what led me into, sort of my heroes. So if you've listened to the episode before, I got these hometowns heroes and hardship. I'll hit that really quick because I didn't do it before. From my first episode with Columba, he was interviewed by our base commander here at Dias, and that's what they talked about. So I do it on every one of my episodes for you guys to get to know the person I'm interviewing. So what are my heroes? I have 4 heroes. I wrote that down, and they're sort of different categories. So my first hero is my father. I still have a great relationship with him today. They moved to Dias, Texas with us when we got stationed here after he retired from working in Les Schwab Tires for, his full career there after the military. But the reason he's my hero is because as a son, the father is the figure you look up to, you idolize. You end up mimicking your habits and your rituals when you get older. But for growing up in a small town, it was very, I think, normal. What I saw in my dad, he worked from 6 to 6 every day. So I saw that aspect of the life there. He would come home. He was at all of our sports games. He was there watching film with us on the weekends. He would go out and play sports with us on the weekends. And I see that now with my kids as far as like the time commitment it took there. I know I don't work as nearly as the amount of hours he did consistently throughout, working that one job. Being in the military is very flexible and different. But I see the time commitment he gave us after work where he loves to cook. And, so I saw that growing up. He was always very open to people coming over to our house. So whenever we had friends over, he was cooking. He would do dinners or breakfast for a lot of the sports teams in towns. He was always cooking for the church as well. And I see that now. I have weekend workouts with my airmen where I bring them over and I cook them breakfast out of my time, to give back to them. I cook barbecues. I love cooking on the weekends. I'll cook whenever I can. So it's fun to see those habits and traits relate into my life now as I'm a father and building on top of that. So number 1 hero, my dad, right there. He still grinds. He's still moving. He's, now losing weight. I think he's lost almost up to 50 pounds, continuing on his journey as he sees the relationship he's building with my son and his grandkids to be there and move around a little bit more. So it's not just a little bit part of early in my life. It's just throughout my whole life. He's always been there. And it's just always there. And I think a son should always have their follower to look up to. And that's something I try to give to my kid as well, for him to idolize that and see that in his habits and rituals when he grows older. So that's my first one. My second one are my coaches. Like I said, growing up in a small town, your friends' dads are like your dad, but they're also all your coaches for sports. I had some of the same coaches for a lot of my high school sports. My baseball, basketball, and football coaches were all pretty similar. And that's what I loved. They were like other father figures for me growing up, but primarily my high school football coach, Coach Cox, he was an idol for me. It was great to see, looking back now, what he instilled and always did and still does to this day. And that's why I love coaching as well. It was because I had great coaches growing up. I love coaching my sons and daughters' teams. I've coached multiple teams before, from college rugby to little league baseball to elementary school basketball. Wherever I'm at, I'm coaching. I'm involved in multiple coaching opportunities, and those are heroes to me because, growing up in a small town, in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was sports. Sports is what you idolize, and so coaches was one of them. My coaches were there for us to teach us how to say yes, sir, no, sir, how to shake a hand after practice. I've talked about that on multiple episodes before. After every football practice, our coaches would line up and we'd have to go through and shake their hands. And what they taught me was just really respect. Some of those leadership traits I look at now and I see where they came from and how they were prioritized in my life then. So direct eye contact, shaking hands, yes, sir, no, sir, how to talk to somebody, how to be a role model. that's my second hero right there on my coaches. I can just remember a lot of memories struggling through sports, and they're just there. Maybe my dad's not there per se directly right away, but they're there, and they were like fathers to us. They went to church with us. Like I said, I was close. Their sons were our friends. My best friend Javi, his dad coached us through a lot of stuff. I stayed multiple nights at Javi's house with his dad there, coaching us when we were at home, playing sports with us. It's just an amazing thing for people and young kids to have our good coaches in their life. And that's what I try to give back as well to the kids I coach. They're younger ages, so they may not remember it as much, but just to be there for those kids, to have somebody to look up to, see what an adult how they should hold themselves, how they should talk about themselves, how they should talk about others, how they should build those relationships. That's what I try to give to coaching. And coaching is one of the best things out there. If you ever have the chance to do it, I highly recommend you step outside your comfort zone and go coach something. It's pretty easy to do. A lot of little leagues out there you can go coach to. High school teams always need people to help out. And that's just something you should do because it's underappreciated too, especially at those lower levels. It's definitely underappreciated. So my father and my coaches. My third one, if you don't know already, I'm a huge football fan, and I'm a Patriots fan. I was very blessed to be a Patriots fan throughout the time I grew up idolizing sports. And so if you know the Patriots through the 2000s decade, 2000s, 10s, and 20s, it's Tom Brady, man. He is one of just a freaking idol to idolize when it comes to sports. And you're seeing it now, and this is 2024. Him after his career talking about some of that stuff that made him who he was. And man, you got to think about what it was like growing up in Northern California, where a lot of your friends are Raiders and Niners fans, and I'm a Patriots fan. In 2000, I remember when Brady takes over, when Drew Bledsoe gets hurt during that game, and it's I'm very fortunate to have the Patriots as my favorite team throughout high school, enlisted time, and college. Like, no matter where I was, I had the Patriots to rely on for a victory. It was so amazing to watch Tom Brady throughout his career. And the reason he's an idol and a hero for me is it's comparable to Kobe Bryant in basketball when it comes to the GOAT of all times. His passion, his commitment, his drive, his grit, his relationships he had with his coaches and players, getting uncomfortable when it comes to how he played the game, how he managed the game, taking care of himself, right? And his lifestyle is what we idolized as kids and we should look up to. Now, I remember being younger and watching him play. It was insane. Like, there was nobody you would want to have the ball with in 2 minutes, and you couldn't stop him. And I just heard it on the news yesterday. The announcer talking about Tom Brady's ability to play with anybody and make them great is what was one of the things that he did amazing. Like, you look at the career of the Patriots when it comes to their early 2000s dynasty, where he won those Super Bowls with some Deion Branch, named wide receivers, that Troy Brown, nobody really knew about. And then he comes through and he gets Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, Gronkowski, Hernandez, all these big name guys, Randy Moss, and he makes them fit into his system. He was able to adapt, not change to the way he played, but change to the way they played. And it's just amazing to see what he did coming into NFL time, and really that time in the NFL where it stood out. It was growing with the passing offense, and he took it and ran with it and threw with it. So Tom Brady's one of my idols, man. I'm still a Patriots fan to this day. It's hard to watch football now without watching with Tom Brady being gone. It's insane. But that's one of my idols there. It was great. I wore the same jersey throughout his whole career, and the same hat for every football game. I brought it with me whenever I went somewhere. When I was deployed to Guam in the deed, I made sure that jersey was with me. I wore it on the plane flying across the ocean from from Abilene, Texas to Guam, because they were playing the Super Bowl in Atlanta versus, I can't remember who it was against, but where they came back and down 28-3. I had my jersey on. Oh no, I think it's Houston. It was in Houston, but I can't remember who they were playing. But I had the jersey on during that flight and the hat because I lived Tom Brady and the Patriots through that time. So he's my sports hero. Kobe Bryant is a close second. I was never a Lakers fan, but my dad was. So we grew up watching a lot of Lakers games in California, growing up in Northern California, you had a lot of Kings fans. So there was always that fun time going to Arco Arena, watching the Lakers play there. I remember taking a trip as a family down to LA, going to the Staples Center and watching the Lakers there. And I think we are, obviously with Kobe Bryant passing, you didn't realize how great of an athlete he was until obviously sometimes when they're gone. So you look back and you just go, man, Kobe Bryant is a close second with his grit and his determination. And yeah, everybody knows that. All right, so there's my sports players. The next one, more of a like a movie hero. I love my action movies. I love Marvel. I love DC. If you don't know that, I will watch those movies all the time when I'm bored. So my other hero is the Punisher. Now I have a Punisher logo on me, on my thigh, for that one reason, because the Punisher is just the guy. He's just a normal guy trying to just hurt everybody that does bad. And he is insane. And so I love the Punisher because he's like my alter ego when things get hard. You flip that switch and you got to be able to dig deep. I talk a lot about having that dog in you when times get tough. And the Punisher is that guy. The show is amazing. The story, right? Frank Castle, whose family gets murdered because he's an undercover agent and they find out who he is. And so they murder his family, and then he just goes on this rampage of killing all the bad people he can find. And it's insane. And so the Punisher is my fourth hero when it comes to maybe fictional characters out there that you just have when you got to dig deep and grind. And so those are my four heroes there. All right, hardships. This is tough. I wrote these down. I sort of had to think about them. We've talked about this on a lot of my episodes. To grow, you have to struggle. To be a leader, you have to struggle. You have to fail. You have to, and I bring up the Shia episode with John Berthrall a lot because he talks about it in there. You don't know where you are until you've been knocked down, kicked in the mud, and then you stand back up. And that's what makes some of the greats, some of their struggles. And, you talk about sports athletes when they come back from a victory or an injury. Tom Brady come back from an injury right there. And, I've had some hardships and they have not been easy. And the reason you have to talk about them is it helps build relationships. And this is a huge thing to being a leader, is being open and transparent with everybody around you. And I talk to it a lot with younger leaders in the military. I talk to it on my episode a lot. One of the things you can do to help build relationships is talk about your struggles. One, being vulnerable is way underrated when it comes to being a leader. And two, it helps build those relationships even more. When people understand what you've been through and how you got through it, it helps them want to follow you and work for you a little bit harder. And if you don't believe me, try it. Go out into your workplaces, go out into your teams, and have those open conversations about struggle, about hardships. And they don't have to be within your career. If you're in the military, it doesn't have to be about the military. It can be about personal stuff, maybe marital stuff, or stuff you've done in the past that you're learning from and you've had to experience firsthand. You'll build better relationships talking about that because everybody can relate to struggles. Social media shows a lot of the positives we have in our life, and so some people will shut it off because all they see is what you're doing well. And so when you talk about that to younger people, as far as like where you've come from or what you've done, they're not going to want to build that relationship with you. So that's why I love talking about the hardships on my episode, because we get vulnerable. I've had some pretty in-depth hardships, with people on my show. And it's because for those listening, it shows the vulnerability, the transparency that we have to be able to be open about our struggles, because that's how we learn and that's how we develop. So I'll try to do mine chronologically without, skipping anything. But overall, one of my first struggles, I say, was growing up in a small town. When I joined the military in 2006, and I remember getting on the plane with my dad, dropping me off at the Sacramento airport from MEPS to go to basic, and not knowing what the world was like out there, right? I joined the military to travel and do new things. I went to San Antonio for basic, and that's an eye-opening experience. I tell a lot of people, like, that was one of the first times I originally cussed, which is funny growing up in a small town, we didn't cuss at all. I didn't drink either. It wasn't part of my religion. I grew up Catholic, but it was just what I saw. Like my parents were really big on us not swearing or drinking. They never enforced it. It was really just what they showed us. My dad would go out and have drinks with the coaches and stuff, but it wasn't, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't there. I'd go to my friends' parties, but I never drank. I just hung out after the games and went back home. But that it was a hardship going out into the world and not knowing what to expect. Joining the military and going to basic training and cussing for the first time to motivate people was fun. It's not a hardship. It's just a funny story. And I've said it on other episodes before. But I really noticed it when I went to tech school at Fairchild for being a survival instructor. Meeting those guys around me and hearing their stories of how they had to battle through some things in life really showed me like, man, there was more out there, than a small town living. And I say growing up in a bubble because that's what my team, like we talk about Manny and be like, oh, Manny grew up in a bubble. So I just didn't see what much. I didn't know what rock music was. I remember my roommate Reynolds, he was a big rocker. And so he would always quiz me on rock music when we'd go out. And hearing the experiences of some of my teammates, of some of those that went to college and joined the military, and some of those that were already married, joining the military and taking those experiences. And it just showed me that there was more to life in the world than that small town living. And so that hardship was, it was just different. I didn't have a lot of those connections with people when I got to tech school. It was really just me being young and naive moving into the military. But it also kept me going forward. So a smaller hardship, but it was also a hardship because I didn't have anything to talk about when it came to those struggles. But hardships were coming, that's for sure, in my career. They were definitely, like God was like, hey man, you've had a pretty good high school life. You grew up in a small town, but I'm about to throw some curveballs at you and see how you handle it. And so let's do this. One of my first ones was deciding to get out of the military and become an officer. 4-year contract as an 18-year-old. I had no idea what the future was going to hold for me. I joined the military to potentially go to college and travel. I go up to Spokane, Washington, and that's where my traveling brings me. A couple years in, I decide I want to get out and go to college and play football. My brother was 2 years younger than me. He was at the time going to college to play football at a small town in Linfield, Oregon. So Linfield College, a D3 school, and he was crushing it up there. I still wanted to play sports. I still wanted to go to college. So that hardship for me was trying to figure out how to become an officer in a time where it wasn't as easy, not as easy, but as known, or you didn't have the resources as much as you do now. I had no idea what to do. But luckily, I met my wife, and she did a year of ROTC in college, so she told me about that. I had the opportunity to go to the academy and teach there for their survival school, and I got to meet with some of those cadets and look at the officer world a little bit. Because being at Fairchild as a Syria, you didn't interact with officers a lot as far as leadership goes. It was very enlisted heavy, so I didn't have officers to talk to. I didn't have any officers to idolize or see. The only officers I knew were the ones I taught in my class, and those were very short relationships as far as being an instructor. They were students, and then they were just there for a course, and they would move on. So trying to figure out how to navigate that was a hurdle and hardship on its own. I did it, but it wasn't easy. I had no idea what to expect going into ROTC or getting out of the military or how to get back in as an officer. I didn't do OTS because I didn't have college, so ROTC was the route. How to get into ROTC, how to get into a college. Luckily, my wife was there to support and point me in some directions that I didn't know were available. She opened up the reserves for me. I was able to get a reserve gig in college. But I say this a lot, and I'm staring at it right now. I had to line up my ducks, and that is a huge key to my journey. Was every time I was doing something, there were ducks I had to line up to get across the road. And it's a fun analogy, and I use it a lot. And that's what got me through those hardships, was looking at the ducks and making sure they're lined up on the road with the mama duck in front and the kids in back, and they weren't too far behind, but they all made it. There might have been some trips and stumbles along the way getting across that road, but they all made it. And that's how it was. I break up my career like that. My enlisted time, there weren't many ducks. My enlisted career was wake up in the morning, go to PT, go to work, do the job, go back, party, play video games, wake up and do it again. There weren't many ducks there. It was college and becoming an officer where the ducks had to line up. And there were some ducks that got lost, and that leads me really into my next hardship was navigating the college life, married after 4 years in the military, and becoming an officer. That was tough. There were two hardships there. One was really just making it through college. I did a lot to experience it to its max potential, I'll say that. But I had no time. My wife rarely saw each other during that college time. She was working a full-time job, mainly at nights, working at a restaurant, working loss and prevention at nights. So we rarely saw each other. I had a very packed schedule from when I started my freshman year to when I graduated. I was doing ROTC, which took up a lab, every Thursday. I had football as well. I walked onto the football program at Washington State, so we had workouts in the morning. And football is a job on its own. It's super busy. I had school. I also worked part-time jobs throughout college. Les Schwab, working at a bar on campus, the Coug. Shout out to those people there. What an amazing job and fun experience. Working for the owner of the Coug, doing random stuff, clearing out hotels one summer. And so that was college for me, like the partying was during my enlisted time, but college was a beast on its own. However, I did party, I'm in college. I'm in Washington State. It's a big party town, and it bit me in the butt. I learned from that. I got a DUI, which was a huge hardship there. It was tough. The way I handled it was bad. The aftermath of it was bad, as far as having to understand what goes on with after a DUI. And I talk about it now because it's a good experience to share with airmen and younger people, the financial burden it costs on my wife, the marital stress it put on us. It was tough. But you learn sometimes by getting kicked in the ass. And this was one of those times where life was like, hey, Manny, here you go. Here's your hardship. Let's see how you deal with it. I was nervous I wasn't going to become an officer. I was able to have great leaders around that time to help me get through it and battle, because I didn't know what to expect. You get pulled over in the middle of the night. I just went with the flow because I didn't want to do anything stupid. So I did what the officer said. I got put into the county jail for the night. One of my friends came and bailed me out because my wife was out of town. So I was very blessed to have him come at 2 a.m. Then I went to work the next morning, and my wife came home that weekend. It was a hardship all on its own, trying to figure out what to do next. Was I still going to be able to become an officer? But being open with it when it came to all the security stuff, that's what you have to do. Everybody, people get DUIs. There's the stigma that if you get a DUI in the military, your career is done, but that's not true. You just have to be transparent, open, learn from it, adapt, and move on. And that's what I did. All right. What hardship did Manny have to face next? DUI, college, small town living. Now we become an officer. What hardships have I had to deal with becoming an officer? One was getting through the B1 academic phase. For those that don't know, I'm a B1 Wizzo by trade. Currently, I'm a navigator on the B1. It's a bomber, jet, fighter, heavy aircraft. It's a little bit of both, but when you go through training, I did a year of school at Pensacola Naval Air Station where you learn how to be a CISO, combat systems operator or officer. Then you get your aircraft, and you have to go through an academic phase, which is learning everything about the jet. So it's like school. I'm not good in school. I'm like an average student. But when you're in the military as an officer, you can't be average. You got to lead by example and get those good grades and push yourself. I almost failed out and got kicked out of the B1 academics through my academic phase. I was going through remedial training to pass. So you had to take a lot of tests. And there was blocks of tests you had to take to move on to the next block. And I think this was the third test. It's one of the hardest, they say. And I failed the first one. I failed the second one. And then I had to go to a third one, which is the board with the commander of my squadron and other aviators in the community to see if you're fit to continue on. This is my first job in the military as an officer. I can't even make it through the school portion. But it was hard. I'm not a good test taker. I get very nervous. I overthink myself, and I'm just not good at taking tests. And so it really showed me, going in through the board process, talking to my wife about if I'm going to be able to continue in this military career and path. And, I was fortunate enough to obviously pass the test, get through the board, because they saw that I had the grit, I had the determination. It wasn't just I didn't know the material, I just had a hard time taking the test. So that's why. Hard time taking a test there. But I tell people, I didn't have good study habits. I had to learn how to study at that time. I didn't study a lot in college. My wife jokes about it all the time. I just got through college. I had a kinesiology degree. It was pretty simple compared to most. It was more about the body and learning about it, and so it was more hands-on stuff. So when it came to me having to study and memorize questions and memorize TOs and data and input, I had to understand how to study there. And so I had to learn how to study again. So that was a hardship there. This is probably my last hardship, I think. No, this is my second to last one. 2 deployments and multiple TDYs in 2 years. That was tough. There was a lot of burnout there. I had a deployment to Guam, a deployment to the Deed. I had 3 TDYs. And I specifically remember on a TDY to Hawaii, FaceTiming with my wife and my young son, and he was crying and didn't want to talk to me. And so I heard that in the back of my wife, like yelling at him to come and talk. And it was miserable. It was tough. I remember crying on the phone because he didn't want to talk to me, and you're trying to get those small moments to have a good talk on the phone with rough cell phone reception. My wife was pregnant, and I think we had JoJo at the time. So JoJo might have been super young, and Connor was around 2. So he might not have known, but it was hard. He didn't know what was going on or where I was. And I specifically remember him running away and crying while my wife's trying to get him to say hi. And I'm in the middle of this island all by myself trying to survive. And it was stressful. And I didn't see a lot of the stress and hardships at the time because I'm deployed. I'm trying to do the mission. But, I look back and I'm blessed. My wife had we had family here. She had a church community. We had my flying community. So we had all that for help. And it's a hardship, those that don't know, or those that are listening, or those that have deployed in the military, you don't realize some of the hardships that the spouse have to put up with, or, being separated is a tough thing. I watch Big Brother, and I see the contestants on there getting emotional because they're in the house for 90 days. And I'm a huge reality TV junkie, and being in the military, it's just part of the job. But it's a hardship all in all. Deployments do not get easy. My third deployment to working in the AOC at Shaw Air Force Base with a couple trips to the Deed was another tough deployment because my kids were old enough to know I was going to be gone for 6 months. Those first 2 deployments, they didn't really understand time. They just knew Daddy was gone. So I'll just say deployments are hard. It's a hardship. You can't make them easy. There is no easy deployment. People will say if you go to your location, it makes a deployment easy. But what makes a deployment hard is being separated from your significant other. Even if you're single, just being in a new area is hard on its own. And so for those listening that aren't in the military, understand there's a sacrifice we give for joining the military. And that's why I love the military. I joined the military to give up some of those freedoms and some of that time because for the ultimate sacrifice to help the world, live as a free place. And that's why I do it. And that's why we signed that check to do that. So that's a hardship there. The last one was getting selected for TACP officer. Now, this was a recent one, again, later on in my career, just this year, 2024. So after my third deployment, I had the opportunity to try to cross-train into a new job. So leave the flying community, go to a more tactical job where leadership is key. And I went out on a limb here, talked to my leadership, and they gave me the go-ahead to pursue this journey. And oh my God, was it a journey. Man, I'll just skip to what it was like failing at that selection phase. So TACP, Tactical Air Control Party, is the job per se. You work with Army on the ground, communicating with flyers in the air on how to call in strikes. Short story there, just quick intro to the job. But they have officers in their community, and I had the opportunity to try to cross train into that and become one of those officers. The way the journey is and the pipeline, you have to submit an application with a physical fitness test, which I passed. Then you get selected for what they call phase 2, which is a 5-day selection phase where they're assessing all the candidates to see if they have the qualities to become an officer in their career, because it's a very, significant and prestigious officer job. I went in thinking I was going to get it with the relationships and talks I had with other people in the community and my background. But, there was things, there's a saying, you live by the gouge and die by the gouge. And I'll say I died by the gouge a little bit. It stabbed me a little and hindered my performance. But what was hard about that week is making it through the week was a huge success for me. I was the second oldest in the class, but physically I was one of the strongest. I had great relationships, so I thought I had everything going. And the way the selection worked is you're called up on the last day in front of the board, and they say if you got selected or not. And you just walk in, they say it, and you leave, and you're like playing catch up on what just happened. I was not selected. I cried my eyes out after that for the whole night, and the next day I drove back from San Antonio to Abilene crying, not knowing what I was going to do because I was banked on this job. But it was hard. I put everything I had into those 5 days. And not getting selected for something by doing everything you possibly could to live and wake up the next morning and move and get beat, compete against some physically fit and great people. People that got picked are amazing. I've had a couple of them on my podcast already, and I'm still close friends to a lot of those people because we suffered through trauma. But that was a hardship, not getting selected, because I thought I had, or I was expecting to get selected, hands down. So not getting selected threw a curveball at me like, hey, Manny, you got some work to do. And it showed me a lot about who I am as a leader, who I am as a person, as a father. And I'm very fortunate and blessed for that. The first thing my wife said to me when I was calling her crying on the phone at like 8:00 that Friday night was, God has his reasons, and he does. And it's allowed me, to have this paternity leave, start my podcast, maintain my podcast, continue on to the B1, build some great relationships, learn about myself, and move on with life. And I think that's what it taught me, like life's going to give you these roads and you're going to see the bright light going one way, but there's a construction sign in front of it that you don't see until you get there, and you have to go left. And I had to go left, and I could have pulled off to the side of the road, got on my car and stopped walking and just sat there. But I drove down that road not knowing where it was going to go, and I noticed there was another fork in the road with a bright light going right. And this time there was no construction sign. So I went down that road, and it's led me down this new path to stay on track and do this new journey. So that's my current hardship. Who knows? I'm going to go back into the flying community and go through some upgrades, and there's going to be some hardships and battles there. But that's life. Life is hardships. To be a leader, you have to struggle. To be a leader, you have to fail. Now, if you're a leader out there and you haven't failed or you haven't struggled, that's fine. You can still be a leader. You'll just have other things to talk about to become a better leader, and just know there's going to be some struggles and there's going to be hardships, and it's going to determine your leadership then. So that's what it's going to be. All right, it's 40 minutes. I got to get ready to go work out in the next 10 minutes, still finish my pre-workout and go grab my son. I hope this episode just opens up a little bit about me, and you understand why I'm doing this podcast and why I love just talking to people and hearing their stories and helping create better leaders, because that's what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about the next generation of the military, because there are some great people out there, and this generation is a great generation to lead. But we have to learn. We have to lead by example in all we do. To be selfless, you have to be selfish. To build relationships off trust and care. And challenge right in front of you by getting comfortable being uncomfortable. If you love this episode, please like, share, save, follow. Reach out to me on Instagram, Manny Mustache. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Facebook. I'm an open book, and that's what my journey is about, is letting you guys hear it and hear other journeys as well. All right, thanks, and I hope you enjoyed the episode.